all this gold. So I'm delighted to be joined for. I'm going to call this season 10, maybe, of the Talent Equation podcast. It's not. I don't really do it in seasons, but every year it seems I have a bit of a summer sabbatical that ends up being an autumn sabbatical, and then I get back on the horse around about getting the run up to Christmas time. So yeah, back podcasting, and I'm delighted to welcome Scott Benbow to the show. Scott, welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, we've had a little bit of a chat before we started.
Yeah.
There's a lot to get into, not least of which the post you put on LinkedIn, which is going to be really interesting to unpack. Got 74 replies, I see. God, it's like gone viral. So there's a lot to talk about in there. But before we jump into any of that stuff, I'd love to just hear your story, find out a bit more about you and your background and the journey that you've been on, and then what you're currently doing and all those sorts of things, because there's just so much to kind of find out about, and I really want to hear it.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it as brief as possible. So currently, right now, I own a franchise of the Football Fun Factory. I'm in West Cumbria, the Lake District, which is northwest England, for anyone who's not in and around England or southern Scotland. I've been doing it for about 4 years now. Previous to that, I had an 11-year break from coaching. I spent on and off 6, 7 years in America, working between summer camps, working with clubs, doing some development stuff there, working with competitive teams. And by about 2009, I just had a burnout, had enough of it. And I just left coaching, moved back to England. And over that 11-year period, um, I wasn't sure what to do. And people kept asking, well, why don't you go into teaching? Because I do have a love for, I've always had a fascination and I guess a passion for helping people achieve things, especially things they thought they couldn't do. So I did my PGCE, or my postgraduate certificate in education. I did not like that at all. And I did a 2 year part time, and within about, I'd say about 3 months, I decided teaching wasn't going to be for me. But I wanted to see it out, wanted to get the qualification because I thought it's going to help me somewhere. And the reason I wasn't really into that course was I just really struggled to align myself with how they were telling me the best ways to teach, how people learn, learning styles, all that kind of thing. I really struggled to get my head around it. And at the end of one of our 2 hour sessions, they played a quick 5 minute video of a lady named Professor Carol Dweck talking about her research, which eventually led to the book Mindset. And I was hooked. There's the thought that the way in which I communicate and talk to someone, the way in which I behave, could have a huge impact on their desire or ability to want to learn. That was it. I read Mindset was the first book I read on that. I looked into a lot of other books around that, around performance and things like that. I really enjoyed them, but it still wasn't quite itching that scratch, you may say. So someone recommended I attempt to read some scientific papers on learning and learning science and things like that. And for someone who doesn't read a lot or didn't read a lot, that was extremely painful. Um, but there were some real good nuggets that came out of it. Some common themes came out of it. And then I was lucky enough. What would it be? It'd be 4 years ago, roughly when I was starting this. I was introduced to a lady. She's known as a learning pirate. You'll find her all over LinkedIn, Lauren Waldman, and she hadn't quite finished it just yet, but she was working on a course called Joining Forces with Your Brain. Lauren, if I remember rightly, is a learning development practitioner in the corporate world and had a similar craving, I guess, and dived into the learning science, but went a lot deeper down the rabbit hole to become a learning scientist. And a friend of mine had her on a podcast and then messaged me straight after, before he'd released a podcast, said, you need to talk to this lady. He introduced me to her. We had a chat over Zoom. I could have talked to her for days on end. She was so fascinating. And a lot of the stuff I'd been learning and going over, the way in which she put it just simplified it right down, but just reinforced what I was thinking, what I was trying to do was along those lines. Um, and then I did the course that she had, Joining Forces with Your Brain. She did it in two parts. So I did both of them. Absolutely loved them. And then I joined the Football Fun Factory. And it was at the same time I was really wondering, because a lot of what it was designing courses and a lot of it looked at like learning development, people in the corporate world. I got me thinking, could I apply this to football coaching? And if I could, would it make a difference? And do football coaches right now use this? And then when I started to get into it, I realized that a lot of what I'd believed wasn't quite right. A lot of what I did was not very effective. And I went on 3 years of just developing me to support the children. So could I apply what Lauren had put forward about learning so that I could enhance my learning and in turn enhance the children's learning? And then I would try it with my coaches and see if I could enhance their learning so that they could then enhance the children's learning. And it all worked. And it worked and it moved forward. Obviously, it works differently for different people. Different people work at different speeds. They have different interests. So that was really fascinating. And although the beliefs I was given, what I learned around learning, and us all having the same process that happens within our brains, us as people are very different. And being able to trigger that process and keep that process going, that is the big challenge. And so, yeah, I got to the point about 6 months ago, a year ago, I started sharing with local grassroots because I was seeing sessions going on. And on one hand, I was seeing frustrated coaches, which is never a good thing because, they're like superheroes, aren't they? They give up all this time, these volunteer grassroots coaches, to make sure that children can play the sport of football. I don't think over the last 4 years of what I've been doing, I don't think they're supported very well. I think they need a lot more. And because of that, I don't think the children get out of their football, especially their training or their matches, what they could be getting out of it. So I've decided that it's time to share. I'm working on doing a couple of short courses just to help the grassroots coaches get an understanding, a simple understanding, something they can apply quickly and use. Because what I've found is when you start applying it, although I'm learning and working on getting better, it's having a really quick impact with the children. And it's helping them to learn and to really enjoy what they're doing and have a great time. Because for me, at the end of the day, it is all about the children. It's about football served me really well through life. I went, when I was 19, I went out to Florida to work for Disney on an internship program. And football allowed me to mix in and integrate with lots of different people who were also working out there. At university, joining the football teams there helped me socialize with different people. Traveling around America, football was the common language. So if we can get people to fall in love with football and just keep playing it throughout their life, one, they're going to stay active, and two, it's going to help them socially. So yeah, that's a big driver for me. If we start them off now young, fall in love with it, and then try not to get them dropping out at the early teen years and keep motoring through and enjoying it, whatever level they want to play at. But yeah, I think that's my deep down my aim.
Your your philosophy resonates very, very strongly with mine. It's probably the big reason I set up this podcast back in the day. Because I felt, like you quite rightly say, that a lot of coaches out there were frustrated, are frustrated. I went through that. I went through a very similar experience to you, where I nearly gave up, and it's only because I was fortunate enough, because I happened to be working in coaching, talent development, and in the sports industry, that I was exposed to people who were able to kind of help and also challenge my worldview. And it was about, once I kind of unlocked myself from sort of an old paradigm around learning, which is, was just prevalent, I then reinvigorated my kind of love for coaching, because then I felt like I didn't have to do all of the things that I felt a bit icky and uncomfortable about. So, and yeah, and because of that experience of, sort of 10 or so years of really quite frustrated, conflict, fueled scenarios where I, really just didn't feel like I thought I got to do whatever I can to help some other people not have to experience that. And like, you and I both are, kind of passionate sort of grassroots advocates. And I work at the grassroots, but I've also worked in the talent pathway. And very often the talent pathway is that sort of convergence between grassroots sport. It's resourced like grassroots sport, but the expectations on the talent coach is enormous, because these young people are really invested now. They've got hopes and dreams, and their parents have got hopes and dreams, and all the dynamics of that make it. And you've also got adolescence and growth and maturation, and all these sort of dynamics. Extremely complex time, and these people are just thrown into the deep end. And I'm like, well, we need to give them some resources. So I'm genuinely a believer, and I also believe passionately, like you do, that um, the coaches, because these coaches are under resourced, they're not bad people. They just haven't necessarily got the tools to be able to do the things they need to do, and they're given the bare minimum in terms of support, and then just expected to go and provide a great experience, and then they get castigated. And the frustration I have as well is I've spoke to so many like performance directors in sports who the thing they always do is point down to the grassroots and go, well, coaching there's rubbish. So that's why we're not doing very well internationally. And I turn around and go, okay, how much time do you spend there? How much resource does your organisation put into those people? And it's usually pretty little. So I'm a big passionate believer about that, and I'm totally on board with you. I'm really interested in when you came across Lauren, and I love the name Learning Pirate, by the way, very attracted to that concept as a kickoff. Um, so this notion, what was the sort of central thesis of the approach? This notion of what did I write? Joining forces with your brain. What was the sort of thing, and what was your kind of epiphany that you then took into your coaching that was sort of the change and the shift?
Yeah, no. So a whole approach, it was a blend. It was, so what's happening in the brain? So when you're going through the learning process, what's happening, and she walks you through the. She makes it very simple to show the neural pathways, the networks, how your neurons connect, and all of that. The electric. So basically, gives you the biology. I have it written down because I realized after doing the course, learning and getting all of that was taking up a lot of time. So I have it written down so I can use it as and when. The simplest way that she explained it was, when you start something out, imagine a a new tree that's just been planted, and if you turned it upside down and had a look at the roots, you'd see there's very small, thin roots, very spread out, and that's a bit like your neurons and the connections when you first start something new. And then if you work hard at it and you practice, and over time you come back to that tree after lots of practice and time, and you turned it over again, you would see this real thick roots that have taken place, really intertwined, very thick bush. And that was the way that she got us thinking about it, that by doing the practice, by working through it, you are building these neural networks. The saying that you've probably heard is that neuron that fire together, wire together. So you're wiring your brain to do specific things. And also, that is when I'm on LinkedIn, that is where I think a lot of people are confused as well when it comes to learning. We can get into that. But then she also walked us through the process and things that you can do and use to enhance learning. So basically, working with your brain or someone else's brain to enhance learning, things like focus. If you don't have a person's focus, then they're not going to get much out of whatever is it you're saying or doing, because focus is the gateway to learning. And then, simply put, it goes the focus. So when you focus, you filter out a lot of the other noise and information out there to absorb and take in what it is you're focused on. Now, I always used to believe that you would put a spotlight on it, but apparently the way in which the brain works is, what you focus on stays the same, but everything else around it dims down. The sound, the noise, whatever it may be, dims down to allow you to focus. And also that there is a process within the brain that you can train yourself to enhance your ability to focus simply by staring at something for 30 to 60 seconds can set you up for a more focused learning period. And you can, if you were to do that repeatedly, then I can't remember the name of, but there's chemical reactions that go on that actually strengthen that ability. And so like that, then she went in and talked about the the working memory and how that's the temporary space where you're using whatever's in there, that it is limited, that it doesn't last for very long. So you have to keep using it. And from there, it's then encoded and becomes a memory over time. The big thing that she helped us to understand was that all of the different aspects and regions of your brain that are involved in whatever it was you were just working on or going to be involved in that memory are all encoded, but it's all spread out throughout your brain. So that's why these networks are important, so that the different parts of the brain can connect to work. And then retrieval, so the ability to pull out that memory of whether it was the action your body's going to do or the knowledge you wanted back to the working memory to use again and to build on it. So that was the process that she simplified and talked about, and then went through some of the biological stuff behind it. And that's what I went away with. And it was when I realized that everyone uses that process. And the reason for that is the brain is very energy hungry. So it wants to be as efficient as possible. So any neural networks you're not using a lot get trimmed down, because there's no point having them if you're not using them, but they're there waiting in case you want to reactivate and build it again. And that's why we create habits and shortcuts and things like that to make things less energy hungry, I guess, for the brain. And it was that really got me thinking, right, how do I trigger that in everybody? If I know what I'm going to try and work with, how do I do it? And then the fact that we discussed quite a lot about how everyone is so different as a person, what you like, what you dislike. As you get older, you've had more experiences in life, so you've had more traumas, more excitement. There's so many different things. With younger children, it isn't as wide and varied often because of they haven't had as much in life experiences. So it was that got me thinking, how do I have to behave? How do I have to communicate? What is it I need to be doing to be helping these, for me, it's been children, want to get this process up and running? Is the way that I can do it without them realizing that it's going on? And I found that I can quite easily by the environment I create, the activities we do, what's going on. And then as they get a little bit older, I try and work with them on what it is and how it works. And it's but also as we went through it, one of the things that was explained was that you're using your whole environment if you design correctly. Because a lot of what we talked about was how you design for the learning, right? So we use that learning process, but how do we design for it? And a big thing that came from me is that we when I used to design, I mean, I was never a big fan of it, but we were asked to do it. It was a lot of drills and things like that, a lot of isolated technical stuff when I worked in America, which I wasn't really a fan of because it just didn't make sense to me. I was always thinking, well, if I wanted to be better at playing football, should I not be playing football? If I wanted to be better dribbling around cones, then I could do this, that'd be fine. And then, so all those thoughts I've had for years, Lauren just pulled them all together for me. And I was just sat there going, oh my goodness, it's like everything is now starting to make sense. And that's just what I've run with. That's what I've gone with. I've been working. How do I get the children to focus if I need to impart something with them? Um, a simple one is no longer do I just stop a session with everyone standing around and just start talking, because I know it's pointless. Because if I've got 10 different people there, they've probably got 10 different interests in the activity we're doing. So I might only tap into one of their focus points. And I only have one person that wants to listen to me, 9 that don't. Also, if people are standing all around, they can't hear me as clearly, they can't see me, they're not as interested. So for me now, if I need to explain an activity or what we're going to start, they all come in and I will do something with them so that I know they're focused on me. So the latest one I tried out was we have like little size football. We have size 3 footballs, and they're yellow, and the newer ones are a little bit more luminous. So in the evenings under the lights, they're quite bright. So what I decided to do was try to write one of the children's names holding the ball. So moving it round, and if you move it fast enough, it has that little bit of a trail on it. So I would write a name, and my whole concept was if I can get these 12 children staring at that ball, I'm activating that focus process. So I would write one name and they would all guess it, would have a great time with it. Then I do another name just to make sure I'm using up 30 seconds to a minute. They'd guess that, we'd have a great time with it. And then they go, right, this is what we're getting into. And everyone is staring at you. Everyone is intently looking. And it's a really weird feeling the first time you do it, because when I didn't used to do it, I'd have someone would be looking for a football to kick. Someone would be looking to see what the other group's doing. 4 or 5 would be looking at me. One would be staring up at the stars. But once I started doing this, all eyes were on me, all focused on what I was doing. But then what I realized was I would talk too much, and you would slowly see them one by one, the eyes starting to drift, them starting to lose that focus, which I started to realize is I'm losing them at that point. So then it was like, can I cut it down? So now, if I'm explaining a game, I try to keep it under 30 seconds. And that I've learned to really slice my layers very thin. So they can go off and do an activity, they can come in, they can get a drink, I can add the next bit of the layout and send them off again, and off they go. And any I don't like to say interventions, I don't do corrections, I don't believe in that. I'll do suggestions and nudges to try and get them to come up with the solution on the fly. But they're things I've experimented with and taught myself. I've shared it with a few other grassroots coaches lately who they're now starting to realize how hard it can be to change a behavior. And as they're starting to realize how hard it is for them, now it's clicking how hard it is for a child to learn to do something new. So the appreciation of how long it might take is starting to sink in, which I think is helping with the frustration part, because they're starting to look at it differently.
Fascinating. God, there's so much to unpack. Where to
Oh yeah,
start?
I
Where
know.
to start? Um, Actually, I think this is interesting because it's going to nicely sort of segue us into the conversation that I teased at the start. One thing I'm curious about though is you talked about. Thank you, by the way, for going through the or unpacking the stuff that Lauren talks about. Um, It also makes sense a little bit now. Your like perspective and your philosophy, and kind of, you come from more of a mixed methods, I suppose, approach, and you recognize utility in coming at it from different
Mm.
standpoints. And it's interesting just to explore that a little bit more. And I definitely want to get into that. But um, you, one of the things you talked about was like this sort of paradigm shift, I suppose. God, I use the word paradigm too much at the moment, but anyway, where you've seen so you've learned something about learning and the way the brain works and the brain's approach to learning and the biological processes and all those sorts of things, and it opened your eyes. How was that different from, and interestingly then you mentioned this, that the fact that you've never been a fan of isolated drills, you would prefer to do kind of a more uh representative practice
Yeah.
approach. Um, so what I was interested in was how did that learning about learning, if you like, and learning about the science of learning, what was the shift in approach that you came to? Like, what were you doing before? And then what did you do differently, having learned more about learning? Just to bring that to life for me a little more.
Yeah. So what I was doing before was what they teach you to do.
Oh,
So
okay. So just
what
unquestioningly following the kind of
yeah,
script sort of
yeah.
thing. All
So
right. Okay.
so this is how we do a session.
Right.
This is why we do this. This is why we do that. And it never really sat with me. But back then, I didn't really have the confidence to step forward and say this doesn't seem right or this doesn't quite resonate too well or whatever. So I always put my own little twist into things. But generally, it was like, well, here's our curriculum. Or if you go on a coaching course, this is the way you do it. Um, but stepping away from coaching altogether and just focusing on learning and then coming back and saying, could I apply this learning to coaching? I made sure that when I left, I didn't go through any more coaching courses, certifications, or anything like that because I didn't believe in them. I thought something was missing. And now coming back and saying to myself, can I apply this learning and what I've learned about the brain and how I can work with it? Can I train myself to apply myself much more effectively so learning is happening? I can see it happen, I can monitor it, I can track it, which has meant when I've come back into football, I haven't come back into football following any theories or any training or anything like that on purpose because I just wanted to come in purely from here's a learning scientist. This is what she has talked about. This is what she's taught, what she's presented. And can I, so I could see how I could use that when I was in leadership and management training. So I worked with apprentices and things like that. When I was in that space, I could see exactly how I would apply that straight away, how I would change up sessions and everything. But when I looked at football and I thought, you've got this really dynamic environment, it's constantly changing. You're looking at both cognitive learning that's got to go on and physical learning that's got to go on and combining them all together. And, you know, you've not going to. So, how do you get the knowledge across? How do you get them to develop the physical part of it? The biggest thing for me is the question of, well, what is it I want them to learn? So I approach everything with what is it I want them to learn, which in turn flip my world upside down because when I look at curriculums from different places, they don't make sense. Why are you only going to go for 6 weeks doing this? What if the child needs 12? What if they're up to speed in 3? So it's like now I have many more questions than I ever had when I was blissfully just going along doing whatever I was doing, right? It didn't quite make sense. That's fine. They're having fun. They're playing football. That's the main thing. Now I feel like because I've seen it work, I now have a responsibility to help these children to give them the most effective learning moments possible. Otherwise, am I wasting their time? Like, for example, a few nights ago, we finished a session. Another team comes on after us. I don't know their age, but I would guess they're probably under 11, under 12. And they always start out by running laps. And then they run the laps. And what happened when they were running laps was one or two of them enjoyed it and sprinted around the 2 laps. This is like a 9-a-side field. Most of them weren't too bothered, so jogged around, weren't really putting it in, kind of just got to do it. Coach wasn't happy with that, so I had a bit of a go at them, tried to get them to go faster the second lap. The second lap was even worse than the first. And then because the coach was frustrated with them, there was no intensity, whatever, and brought them in, give them this big speech, and then went into what they were going to do. It was 15 minutes into their hour session by then. And then when they started the activity, you could see there was no energy, there was no focus, there wasn't much. And then Luckily, the activity he'd chosen, everyone was involved. It was a bit competitive. Then the spirit ramped up. Then they got involved. Then they got energized. But then he stopped it because he was frustrated because why are you not putting this same intensity into the very beginning? You've got to come and do it. So I'm like, I'm watching a coach who's trying to give the children the best opportunity with what he believes is going to help them. I'm also watching children really not enjoying what they're doing. Not much learning is going to go on in that whole session. So then after an hour, you've got a coach walks away frustrated. You've got children leave that didn't really enjoy it. Well, what's the point in that session? So for me, it's like the coach has got to enjoy it. We've got to help them have a way, right? Because without them, we're not going anywhere. So how do we help them enjoy it? And then how do we do it for the children? So for me, it's like, right, the coach wants to do a bit of fitness work at the beginning. So when I'm driving home, I can't help myself sat there thinking, right, that first 15 minutes, how if I was to talk to that coach, how could I either give him a suggestion or nudge him or educate him a little bit so that he would be able to come up with a different activity to do in that first 5 or 10 minutes that would give you the engagement you want, would give you the energy you want, and would have them running around and warming up like you want from laps. But then also the question then becomes, okay, well, why we're doing this? Because a warm up we want to do great, but why we're doing this? What is it we want them to learn? So in a warm up, changing directions because you do that in a match, right? A short run, a longer run, you do that in a match, and so all these things come into my head, which then just kind of guides the session I would do. And I kind of look at one that came to mind. I don't know if you've ever done it, but we call it foxes and farmers, where your foxes have a little tail, the bib, and the farmers are the ones that run around and try and catch you, right? And then you do that, and then if they're quite good, you can step that up where they do it with a ball. Well, I was curious because the kids love it. So I had the opportunity with a slightly older group. I think they were under 16, and I just the coach kind of trusted me. So I said, "Can I try this activity to get them warmed up for you? I want to see if we can get the energy, the everything you're desiring from doing laps. Can I get this for you out of this and get your so then your session's launched and you're flying." So we played foxes and farmers, and at first when I explained it, they were like a bit dubious, right? We're teenagers, everything's changing. Going, do I want to do this? The moment they started playing that game, the competitive side come flying out. There was no walking. Everyone was running. There were sprints. There was change of direction. There was avoiding each other. And they absolutely loved it. So then we threw a ball in and said, right, come on, then you've all got a ball each. I'm going to make it extra hard. The catcher's not going to have a ball. They're just going to come and try and get you. And they can either get your ball or they can get your tail. So now, what are you going to do? You're going to show them your backside. You're going to show them the ball. What are you going to do? And so just through loads of there's lots of little challenges. They've got to make these little decisions about which way they're going to face, where they're going to run, what they're going to do. But then we just let them play. There was no talking to them as it was going on. And I think it was about 7 minutes we stopped them. They were all like absolutely exhausted. They were all ready to go. They were loving it. There was a buzz. There was an energy. They went and got a drink. And then the coach took them and they had a great session. And I think now he kind of goes with that. For another one, the children would turn up and just be booting the ball around. And I used to do this, but I used to notice people get whacked in the head because young children would just walk in front of the goal while someone's shooting. So one of the things I learned when I joined the Football Fun Factory as part of our method is we have arrival matches. So we set up the little pitches as they arrive. We give them a bib. We put them in there. They start playing a match. I get to welcome everyone in. Guess what? No one asks me when we're playing a match throughout the whole session. So they get about 5-10 minutes. That means anyone running in a little bit late, they don't have to worry about joining in because they jump into a match. So I suggested this to these coaches. They started doing that. Guess what? No issues, no kids getting hit. The kids started arriving early for practice because they wanted to play a little bit longer in the match. So instead of just rolling in at a bang on time, they're rolling in 5 or 10 minutes early. but we're working with what's enjoyable, what's fun, what they want to do. So I'm working with the children because it's like you do something new, you do something different, you do something challenging. It can be really exciting. You want to get there, you want to get going. I mean, I was sat here ready for our podcast 10 minutes before, waiting to click the button because I've never done this before. This was exciting to me. And having listened to the podcasts before, I was like, oh, I'm probably going to get some good challenge against what I believe here, which is going to be great. Because as you said, I'm not tied into, or I don't believe I'm tied into a specific theory. I'm tied into what I was shown as the science, which has worked. And then if someone can show me different or how to enhance it, then brilliant. Let's add to it and challenge it. But so, yeah, it's just that excitement. How can I get better to help? If I can get better, they can get better. And if the coaches can get better, the children are going to get better. And if the children are going to get better, they're going to keep loving the game. They're going to keep playing and they're going to keep going. Some of them might take it a long way and eventually have the dream of getting paid to play football at some level. Others, they're just going to turn up with their friends once a week and run around and stay active and have a great time. It's, wherever you take it, you take it. But for me, grassroots, can I help the coaches? Can I help the children? Basically.
So, I mean, I love so much about what you said there. The thing that really strikes me, though, the thing that really I take from what you were just talking about was the notion of putting them first, really, and working backwards from what it is that they want as a starting point from a sports experience, and then and then trying to then weave in some of the things that they might need as well, because you can't always just do the things that they want, because that would be a bit like just giving them junk food all the time. And I'm not saying that the things they want is junk food necessarily, um, but I'm just saying that you need to mix it up. And so sometimes there are things that you're going to do, but you don't have to um, mortgage the fun, if you like,
No.
and be a slave to some other model of practice design because you've got to learn this now. You can actually weave it all in, and I definitely heard that. And the other thing I really heard as well was engagement and how important engagement is in fostering a motivational climate that leads to learning. Whereas the previous coach was essentially going through the motions, let's face it, with laps and stuff,
Yeah.
not getting the engagement, in actual fact, probably getting half the group to be really quite disengaged by that as an experience, and then trying to force engagement into them via lecture or, some sort of other approach, punishment or whatever it might be. And that is a very traditional learning model that you see quite often, you used to see anyway in education. And this idea of you're going to do this and you're going to like it, because
Yeah.
I say so, because I am the all-powerful coach here who knows best for you. And you're coming at it the other way, which is to say, let's make some. I refer to this, and I've spoken about it a lot, like it's like a broccoli burger. Or the other way I've heard it referred to is you're hiding the veggies in the lasagna.
Mm.
So you're creating something super tasty, and they love it. And when can I do it? How can I get more? Coming back for second helpings, right? But inside that is nutrition. Inside that is something that's going to do them loads of good, and is going to help them to become, kind of stronger, better, whatever it might be. And so I definitely hear that philosophy in your approach very, very centrally.
Yeah. The main thing for me is they don't need me. As humans, we're designed to learn. That's how we survive in the world. We learn, we adapt, and we move on. You only have to watch toddlers, watch them learn to walk. They don't need us. I mean, we can support them and try and nudge them in the right direction. They don't need us. Children don't need us to learn. If you go back to when we were younger, how many hours did you spend just playing with your friends in a field, on the street? There was no coach there. We would learn, we would get better, we would challenge each other. So my thing is, if they don't need me to learn, but I can enhance their learning if I get it correct, I need to look at them and say, as you said, what is it they want? They want to have fun. They want to enjoy themselves. They want to be with their friends, right? So, okay, well, what is fun for a 4 and 5 year old? And stories work great for that. Having a ball each and running around, that's great for that. And now when I get to 9 and 10 year olds, well, what's fun for them? Being with their friends, playing with their friends, competing, that's fun for them. So we can change it up. And the easiest way to find out what's fun is I just talk to the children. When they arrive, I have a conversation with them, how's school been, what have they been up to, what's been great this week. They will tell me all of that. If I can just jot that down, remember, I can start to build a picture of what seems to be fun for this group. And then can I tie that into whatever it is I want to do? But it's all about the children. They don't need me to learn. As a coach, I'm only ever going to do two things. I'm going to get in the way of learning and slow it down or stop the process, or I'm going to enhance it and move it forward. So sometimes for some coaches, if they just step back and let the kids play, it'd probably be better for the kids. Other coaches, just that little nugget at the right time in the right kind of way just sets that child off on another level for the next 10 minutes, which enhances the learning moment that's going on. So yeah, my whole approach is about the children. And like you said, there's needs and there's wants, right? What does a child need to be able to, and the way I look at it is be competitive, right? Because if you, and I've had this before, but when I joined the team and I didn't feel that I had the ability of everyone else around me, so I didn't feel like I was competitive with them. So in practice, in training or whatever, and that kind of like, that took away a lot of the enjoyment for me. And then that added fear and took away a lot of other stuff that fear will remove, like your energy and your focus, all of that. But then when I went and I was in with a group where I felt, we're all very similar. We're in every activity we do, we're really competing with each other, which then meant on a match day, we could really go and compete against someone else. What does a child need to be able to do that? And so far, I've talking with lots of different people, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible for coaches, right? Because a lot of grassroots coaches don't have the time or the desire to know all the technical stuff. But so what we looked at was ball manipulation. So can the child move the ball around with their feet? Can they stop it? Can they turn, that kind of thing? Ball control. So when the ball comes to a child, can they control that ball fairly quickly? And I guess depending what age, there's different parts of your bodies to control. And then ball striking was the other. Can they strike the ball in different ways, which would then allow them to do different types of passing, do different types of shooting, all that kind of thing. Today, I'm looking at those things and how we continually keep moving those forward. And I believe, is it Tom Bayer, I believe, who does Soccer Starts at Home? His whole thing is getting at home the children manipulating the ball to really enhance those core skills, so that when you now are on at the training or wherever you're at with the team, the coach can focus on the team aspect. I find it very strange when a coach has a team together and it's focused on individual stuff, because I think you don't get, in a week, you don't get a lot of time where you're actually with a team, a group of players. So my belief is that in that moment, we should enhance that, and all the stuff that could be learned from working as a team, working together, doing challenges, more of the cognitive side of it, I think should be done in those situations, because they're hard to mimic elsewhere. It's hard to mimic dribbling a ball around in a tight space with 12 other people, trying not to crash into them at home when it's you and mum or you and dad. But when the child's at home with mum or dad, there are little games and activities and challenges they can play together that focuses on these little core skills. And then when you come to practice, that's where you get to try them out with other people around. I get pushback on this a bit, that, well, you can't do individual stuff and then go and do this. But if I take 4 5-year-olds, the ones who are always the most skillful, they've got the higher level of these core skills, play with the ball at home. So when they arrive, the ability to manipulate the ball, to move the ball, to strike the ball is better than a lot of the other children. But when I talk to the different parents, one child has spent about 10 hours over the week at home just with the ball at their feet doing different things, and the other child hasn't done anything. They've gone swimming, they read, they play different sports, which is fine. However, because they're not spending that time with that ball and practicing, when they turn up to practice, when we go back to thinking of growing your neural network, they're 10 hours behind this other person. So obviously the ability looks a bit better. And then I'll say to the parents, look, if we can create some fun games at home, then they're going to touch the ball a bit more. They're going to practice. We get used to it. And when they come to practice, they're going to be a little bit better. So then we can apply it with everybody. And it works every single time. So for me, it's what do they need to learn? Right. You need to get comfortable with the ball. The only way to get comfortable with the ball is to have that ball. Whether you walk around the house and try not to crash into anything, or whether you scatter a load of objects on the living room floor and you have to get from one end of the minefield to the other end without blowing your ball up. It's because when you set it up like that, you've got to control the ball. Yes, you're moving through cones, but the cones are just laid out in any order, or the pillows or sweatshirt, whatever it is just laid out. So the child has still got to move the ball around and try different bits of their feet and go in different. They've still got to choose their path. It's not like I'm saying, here's 5 cones, you must go in and out of them, because when you say that, you're literally telling them which movement to use. And yes, they'll get better at that movement, but only that movement. If I give you a big scatter of everything and say, get to the other end of that, now you can use any part of your foot that you want to use. And you're going to discover it for yourself and find out what you like and what works for you. And the parents, I'll work with them and say, right, look, if they start to get frustrated, let them go again. If they get frustrated to the point where they're ready to quit, that's where you step in with a little suggestion. And we just keep that process motoring along. And for the parent and for me as well, it's learning about that child and their threshold. So when are they going to get to the point of challenge where they just want to give up? Because if they want to give up, learning, switch off, whatever, they're not going to keep going, or it's going to pause and you're going to have to reset and get going again. If I can really challenge them and keep them going to the brink of where they almost want to quit, and then give them a nudge or a suggestion which helps them overcome something, and then they're reinvigorated and then they go again, that moment of learning is extended. So every moment of learning, the longer we can keep it going, the more intense we can have it, then the better for growing these neural networks. And the more information we can put into it, then even better. However, saying that, what a child who is learning to move a ball around, one thing I have really noticed, and Lauren had mentioned it, but I often want to experience it as well as just being told it, is that the closer to the beginning of learning something that you are on this journey, then the tighter your focus is. If you watch any child who's learning to dribble a ball for the very first time, or not been doing it for very long, their eyes and their head are fixated on that ball. And as we'd said with focused, everything else is dimmed out around it. So I could put that child, and I've done it many times, into an environment where there's lots of other information for them to use, and they don't use it because it's dimmed out. So the child who, I've seen this many times, is with our cones, the child who dribbles past the cones on your area and keeps going until the fence physically stops them. because they're so focused on that ball or trying to stop that ball, or the children who run into each other because they're so focused on the ball, they're not even aware of anyone around them. And then what seems to happen is, as they get more and more comfortable with controlling it, that focus widens out, and they don't look down as strongly at the ball, and they look up a little bit more, or they seem to, even if they're looking at the ball, they seem to sense if someone else has got close to them, and then they move a little bit. It's fascinating to watch. You can just see these little changes. The child who used to just run into everyone, or the child who went all the way to the fence, as they get a little bit better, they start just picking up. Like the one child who used to go to he'd go 3 or 4 times in a row, and his thing was trying to stop the ball. But eventually he started to pick up just the cones and would stop closer and closer to the edge, and then eventually would stay away from the edge as he got a little bit better. So yeah, I just find it absolutely fascinating.
This is a nice
pulling it together.
This is a nice segue into kind of part of what we're going to talk about today, because I actually see the learning process really differently.
Mm.
So, what you've described there, I think, is what is the cognitively derived explanation for learning, and therefore the models utilized follow that. So, the notion of becoming very focused on the task, becoming competent at the task, and I think the classic language used often is sort of unconsciously competent, or consciously competent, consciously incompetent, all this language. But the idea being is that the focus is here, and then as we become more proficient, the focus can move outward, and we can begin to perceive other stuff in the world, and then we can gain the movement kind of acuity to go alongside the ball manipulation. But in the first instance, the priority is to gain the ability to manipulate the ball and then to apply it into the context. And of course, an ecological practitioner or an ecologically informed practitioner thinks of it very differently. So I actually think there is a misunderstanding fundamentally about what the fundamentals of, let's use football as in this case, because that's what we're talking about, about what the fundamentals of football are. So the assumption being is that you need to be able to manipulate the ball to then be able to then go and be competitive and play in the game. So my view is no, you don't. you do, 100% you do eventually, but it's not necessarily the starting point. The starting point is you need to understand how you interact with others in the environment. So you need to understand how you interact with the people who are on your team in the same colour, and you need to interact with the people who are on the opposition in a different colour. Because what they do changes what you do, and what your teammates do changes what you do. And if you're not taking that information in from the get-go, and it's not there present in your learning environment, that learning environment's impoverished because you're learning to do something that some way down the line you're going to have to do something very different. Because your ball manipulation is great, but it's only great, in my view, if you're doing it in concert with your teammates and your opponents.
Yeah.
Because that radically changes the kinds of things that you might do. And I've had previous experiences of this, lots of experiences of watching kids learn ball manipulation techniques in isolation, then going into a game context, doing the same ball manipulation technique at the wrong time, in the wrong place, with no cognizance of anybody around them or anything they need to do around them, but just still doing the same action over and over again because it's been something they've learned and repeated. So I think that's actually a bit of a flawed model, personally. I actually think that we need to think about it slightly differently. I know you don't disagree with me here, by the way.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that you've touched on, I think, when you talked earlier about like you didn't necessarily come at it with a theory. We all come at it with a theory, whether we know it or not. But the point being is that the majority of us, before we learn anything about learning theories, and you've gone into a proper deep dive here in all the different learning theories, and you're trying to, like most of us, make sense of how you can kind of wed them together. But what most people do without any knowledge of learning theory whatsoever, which by the way is a huge failing in coach ed, that nobody learns anything about learning. Given that we are learning designers, that's fundamentally our experience, what we're trying to achieve. And actually, when when people come into that, when we're designing things or thinking about it, we haven't got any learning framework to be able to think about those sorts of things. It's natural, isn't it, that you follow the patterns that are tried and tested, that everybody else has always done. Like you said, unquestioningly, you
Yeah.
just do whatever everybody else does. But it's only that question of when you begin to start to see, actually, this doesn't really fit, it doesn't work. And then you start to
Hmm.
just look for other solutions and other explanations, that you start to go, oh, right, I'm coming at it through different, I need a different lens to this. I need to experience it differently. But that dominant paradigm, that dominant model of linear transfer from isolation or relative isolation towards context is the dominant model used everywhere.
Yeah.
It's got pure hegemony over most educational situations, and for that matter, certainly most coaching models. Like that's definitely the dominant
Yeah.
model that most people default to. It's like the default approach. Ecological turns that on its head, comes at a different landscape, comes from a different perspective altogether, with an entirely different set of assumptions and an entirely different set of explanations around humans learn, how the way humans learn. Which is like, oh right, ooh, we've got to think about this really differently then in terms of design and everything else. Um, and so that's where I think I challenge that a lot and work
Yeah.
ecologically, sort of semi-exclusively, because like I just that default model is so prevalent. People don't even realize how prevalent it is. It's like the two fish going, God, isn't this water warm? And the other fish going, what's water? It's just there.
Yeah.
It's just there all
And
the time.
I think it's really, really misunderstood because I agree with you in that the environment, having all the children together, that's why a lot of the activities we do, we start without a ball because it's much easier to interact with everybody if you're not having to worry about the ball. The individualized kind of stuff for me is I agree with you. I don't think it has to be done first, but I think it can be a nice little add-on just to enhance what you're doing. And I've seen it happen many times where we'll do things and then the child will do a little bit at home. However, also if they're doing something at home, it's it. I don't believe it can be prescribed. You can't prescribe it. It's just got to be a natural enjoyment with the ball. And so that's I don't see it as right. We do the individual technical stuff first, and then we move it up into the match because the way I look at it and the question I ask is, what is it that we want them to learn to be able to do? And ultimately, we want them to learn to be footballers. So we need to give them as much opportunity, as many environments, and as many learning moments as possible to pick up on everything that is involved in being a football player. And like you said, the environment is the huge part to it, right? It's being able to interact. It's all that cognitive side of stuff, as well as the physical ball manipulation that's got to be worked together. And the way in which I see it, when you're building the neural networks, if I was just to start out building just playing with the ball, then I start to build a network that's focused on that. And if I do that a lot and become very good at that, I have quite a solid pathway for doing that. But it's very hard to add other bits to that pathway, if that makes sense. Whereas if I, like you mentioned, if I have them in an environment where they are moving the ball around or they are running around, when they're building and firing these networks and building and picking up on all the different bits, they're building a much bigger and more varied network that involves a lot of different things. And where I think a lot of people get it wrong is that they'll go for the individual skills, like you said, but they have to get to a certain level before it's then deemed that you can go and use it. And for me, it's like, right, we're going to do this. And if I've got a child who's never experienced a ball and is quite a bit behind others, and when I'm observing them, they're not able to interact or they're not interacting with everyone else and the constraints or whatever we have in our game, if they're not able to interact with that as much as everyone else. I'll sometimes recommend to the parents that, look, why don't you try playing a few fun games with the ball at home, just so they can enhance the bit with the ball. So the next time they come back, that bit with the ball, they're already a little bit better with the ball. So now it fits better into what we're doing. So for me, it's like just having a little bolt on that you'll do a little bit of here and there, just to tweak it and move it on a little bit. I really don't agree with, like you said, that I ecological dynamics. When people talk to me about the practical application, I'm like, yeah, I'm with that. When they talk to me about how it's actually working, it gives me quite a few questions. The cognitive side, when they talk about what happens in the brain and all that, I resonate with that. But the way in which most people apply it, I think they apply it very wrong. And it seems to be the thought that if you're going to, the thought seems to be that you're going to learn to do a specific skill, and then you're going to learn to do 10 specific skills, and they're all going to be isolated specific skills. And then what you're going to do is when it's time to use them, you're going to find that specific skill, and then you're going to activate that pathway. And then miraculously, all 10 of them are just going to come together and you're going to become a footballer. That's not what I believe at all. What I believe and what I was taught is that you're building a whole interconnected network with millions, even trillions of neurons that are supporting your ability to move around and interact with that with the environment, whether you're in a match or whatever it is. So we need to be connecting as many of them as possible. So yes, if I've built a network that's around kicking a ball, it's not a specific network on, and this is exactly how you kick it. It's a very vast one that might have 30 or 40 different ways of kicking a ball within that network. And because that network's connected to other aspects of your brain for all your other senses and everything, so as you're absorbing and taking in and it's going back and forward, is adapting to, so do they call it, is it attunement? So yeah, so I agree with that. Everything going on around you is sending information in and out, and it's all moving around. But I don't agree that you're selecting an individual activity, remembering exactly how to do that, and then doing that. What you're doing is, if the ball's coming towards you and it's coming at a certain height with certain, and all of that information is being used to then work with the network, if that makes sense, and fire the appropriate areas to move stuff. Yeah. Now, one area that I want to look into more is like, what would you call it? Like the body. So like the interaction, because I see it as a whole unit. So I've been taught and I've seen it work many times, is the process which I follow right now in the brain. Obviously, my application is very different to people who would usually be associated with that. But then I want to understand a bit more about how movement works, you know what I mean, from like specialists in that area. What's going on in the brain when we're moving? Now, the basics I understand is that electrical signals are fired, they go around to the muscles move, and then our body starts moving, right?
And the other way.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
It's not just one way, it's synergistic.
No, yeah, because information's everywhere, right? Our skin is our biggest organ, and that's feeding us information all the time. But that information's being integrated into these networks. So it's going back, and so as you're building these schemas and these memories of different overall things, I don't see it as, and the way, obviously, again, the other one that I find I'm not 100% sure about is memory. I understand that we build memories because we can retrieve them and we can use them. However, when we're in the moment and we're going for it, and we're interacting, all the different, like if you're running on an astroturf pitch compared to running on a grass pitch, it's very different. As my son found out the other week, your balance has to change. Everything has to shift a little bit, and you're getting all of that feedback through your feet, legs, ankles, your whole body, right? That's coming in and out. So then you're trying to adapt how, and this is where I want to learn more, is that what's going on now, because he's still able to control that ball when it comes. However, one thing that I noticed a lot is that his attention is very much directed on that ball coming and the bobbles and the grass and the spit and all of that, compared to on the astroturf that he uses all the time, that when the ball's coming, he's looking around a lot more and doing all of that. So there is a shift in something going on to, and what I believe is likely going on is he's built this schema for when the ball's coming towards him, that it travels in a certain way at a certain speed. It's very consistent. But now with a grass pitch and how things can change and move and bobble at any time, the speed might be a bit slower with the grass being long. It might be faster with it being wet. He's now having to, especially at the start of the game, when the ball's coming, you're seeing there's a lot of this. And then it seems to be when the ball then gets to him and he gets it, then everything else he seems to bring into it. But as the game went on and he got used to the changing speeds and all that kind of thing, he seemed to go back to the way that he would play on AstroTurf. So it's very, so I'm looking at that and it makes me wonder what's going on here. Because I don't believe he's just built a memory. He's retrieving that exact memory and he's using it. I believe that he's built a network of all these neurons and everything that brings all these experiences and everything together. And now he's trying to figure out through everything back and forward what needs to be firing when to help him out.
So first and foremost, like we're onto something here. So there's something we can really, it's quite exciting to explore. So first and foremost, the way I see that is it's not, like you say, it's not a memory per se, as we would traditionally think of memory, i.e., something that's an experience that I've then locked away in the back of my brain that I'm going to bring back when required, like a piece of software or something. But it is an experience that has both a mental, psychological, emotional resonance, has meaning. And one of the reasons it's important is because it has some meaning. So we've had an experience that has meaning, and the experience that has meaning, because it has resonance, stays with us. Now, some people might refer to that as memory, perhaps. But I think in the physical space, when you're talking about physical experiences, particularly in dynamic team games, where no two moments are ever going to be the same, ever, because they're in different time, and there's different things happening in those things, and there's different outcomes, constantly unpredictable outcomes. One of the beauties of football and team games and all forms of sport, really, but in particular, the reason I'm attracted to these is because of the unpredictability. It's the attractive thing. And navigating unpredictability, in my mind, is a core skill. And gaining experiences that enable you to navigate unpredictability. So you're gaining kind of like a toolbox of unpredictability navigation. So while you were talking, I was thinking of an analogy, right? And I think often when people are, you've referred to this a few times, actually, you've referred to this dimming of the brightness. So actually, that's not a bad metaphor, actually, that I use quite a lot, which is about how bright you want something to be. And using environmental manipulations, constraints, as a mechanism by which to brighten certain areas in the search space, in the infinite possibilities that exist in this world. You might brighten certain areas that require an individual to act in certain ways that in order for them to solve the problem, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what they do is they're learning then the problem solving skills, if you like, the ways of solving the problem more than the tool or the solution you need to solve the problem, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So the way I
Yeah.
liken it is instead of being given a key, that one day a lock is going to present itself that you can insert the key and it'll open it and it'll be amazing. What you're doing is you're learning to pick locks.
Yeah.
So any lock that comes to you, you can unpick eventually. So you get
Mm.
that like real adaptability, that kind of that brilliant level of the lock picking skill, if you like. But in order to learn to pick locks, you've got to be given loads of locks to unpick to become really good at it. And the problem is we don't. What we tend to do in using sort of a cognitive framing, in my view, because the cognitive framing is dominant, is we give kids keys. We think our job is to give them keys. And we give them keys in lots of ways. We either give them keys by getting them to practice certain movement patterns, because we think those movement patterns are going to be important eventually, or we tell them stuff. Do
Mm.
this. Do this will be good for you. Or try this because I think it's good because it's something that I'm knowledgeable about and I think you should learn. An ecological practitioner doesn't do that. An ecological practitioner goes, what is it in this environment that's important that might give you clues as to a way of solving this problem? You might have a million different ways of doing that, but let's explore what they look like and let's explore the relative effectiveness of them together.
Mm.
Again, so it's a different way of coming at it. And I
Yeah,
think
that's my
so,
approach. Yeah.
you know, and going to the post you presented where like you're arguing for essentially like what I would call a sort of compatibilist view, which is to say the cognitive side of things. And I was interested in what you said. Actually, I think you're onto something, by the way, when you said that like it's not necessarily that the cognitive theory is wrong; it's that it's misapplied by
Mm.
people who
Very
probably don't
much so.
understand it properly. Yeah, and I think you're probably right about that actually, because there's no doubt about it, right? Stuff happens in our brains, of course it does, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to walk around and all those sorts of things. I think there's just different ideas about what happens and how it happens. And you know, cognitive approach tends to sort of put the brain as the central feature, and
Yeah.
it's about information then being transmitted to movement. And you've quite rightly pointed out it's way more synergistic than that. And anybody who's involved in movement practice for a long time will know that it's way more. You know, it's, like you say, the brain is getting information from the body and the environment all the time, and then relaying it back, and it's like this, just
Yeah.
constant flow.
Yeah.
And so the environmental piece is a really key important bit. And the minute you haven't got that, then you are then going into brain world. Now, that's not to say, and I think the jury's still out when we talk about the idea of, but should we never do any brainy stuff? And if I'm honest, I don't really know. I just know that when I do brainy stuff, and then hope, and it is hope, that it's going to manifest in a game context. I rarely get the evidence that that's the case. In actual fact, I usually get the evidence to the contrary. So I've
Mm.
sort of given up on it a bit. That's not to
Yeah.
say somebody might not come along with an amazing piece of research that will make me change my mind. But so far, they haven't come up with anything yet. So I'm just going to stick with this for now until somebody comes along with something that's got a better explanation. Because I'm definitely seeing more positive outcomes from the people I work with utilizing a predominantly ecologically informed approach.
No, I would agree with you. And that's where I'm lost, is that I think the cognitive approach to it is broken, because everything you talk about with the ecological approach, I completely agree with. If you want to learn to be a footballer, then you've got to practice in a football environment being a footballer, which means you've got to have all of those things. Now, depending where you are on your journey, what your capacity to focus on different things is going to be limited. So having those guiding constraints, and that's why I say I don't like to correct, because for me, correcting is the coach has an idea of how it should be done. And if it isn't done that way, then the coach steps in to correct it. I believe, like you do, that there isn't a correct way to do it. Is there a correct way in which to pass the ball? No. Depending on the moment, there'll be some ways that'll be more effective than other ways, right? And we see it all the time. You're watching a football match, someone's tried to chip the ball over the top, and you've just, look, if you slide that in, it's much easier to control on the other end. It'll be much more effective, right? But that was the choice they made. Could they have slid it in? Yeah, they have the ability to do that. They just didn't choose to do that in that moment for whatever reason, right? And it might be that in training, the whole focus was on playing the ball over the top. So guess what you start doing in the match, because that's all you think about, playing the ball over the top. So that's why I really believe that you've got to put them in there. You've got to put the problem in there, and you've got to let them figure out the solution. Because one thing that I have learned is that the children will come up with better solutions than me 9 times out of 10. And it's just, I look at it and go, this is how I would do it. And you know what? They've gone and done it a completely different way. And at first, that really made me feel uncomfortable, because it made me think, what am I doing if I think it's this way and they're going and succeeding doing it that way? And then over time, I started to think, that's right, they don't need me. So what they need me for is to help them keep this process alive, this learning
Yeah,
process alive. So
perfect.
if you're struggling, how could I maybe nudge you? Like, young children tend to, they dribble with the ball and they tend to try and stop it by hooking their foot around it and stopping it dead. Or if we do like turning with the ball, so they're running around an area and they get close to the edge, and we try and get them to turn away from the edge, and they turn like a bus using the inside of the foot. That always seems to be the go-to for the children. If you just leave them to it, that seems to be the go-to. And like there'll be one that really struggle, the ball's going too fast, can't get the foot around it, just can't adapt quick enough. And it gets really frustrating. They want to give up, the ball rolls out. And I'll say to them, look, I've got an idea that might change your life here. And they go, oh, what's that? What's that? And I said, watch this. This is what I learned to do, and this really helped me. And I just put my foot on the ball quickly. And at first they look like, well, that's not impressive. And I said, but look, when I've done this, and then I'll run around the ball. I can go anywhere I want now. And then they go, and then what starts that? Then they start to, and for like the first 2 or 3 times, they're really looking at that ball and they're trying to balance their body and put it on. And I'm looking at it going, I can see all of that information going back and forward, correcting constantly just to figure out what's going to be best. And then they'll do it the second time, they get it a bit quick, and the third time a bit quick, and then they've got it. And it doesn't take long at all. But guess what? That becomes part of their, as you said, lock picking toolbox, because anything can happen once I've done that. Or if the ball's bobbling, or it's all, if I just do that, I can go again. And like you said, I like the tool picking the locks analogy. Is we want to help them problem solve. We just need to give them, the way in which I see it is, we need to give them those basic lock picks. So I don't think there's a different pick for every single lock, but there might be a pick that used in a certain way could open 10 locks, but it has to be slightly different for every lock.
Mm.
So for example, that might be a pass.
Mm.
So you learn to strike the ball, say you learn to strike the ball with your laces and you're quite comfortable with it. Well, from there, you could play a long ball on the floor, you could play a long ball over the top, you could shoot just using that tool. Well, that could unlock a lot of different things. So when I'm saying I want the children to get the basics of a core skill, as we might have called it, it's so that they, not so they become great with it, because I don't want them to isolated become great. I want them isolated just to be able to do it, so that when they make the decision to use it, they can actually use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
and it's got,
and
and
it,
then it's got meaning to them,
yeah,
as opposed to they're doing
exactly.
it because someone else has said this is important. You know, because I think what a lot, just to extend the key metaphor, what I think a lot of people do is they go around giving kids keys with imaginary locks, going, right, practice turning this in that imaginary lock, because one day there's a real lock going to arrive and you're going to have to be able to clock it. And the minute that real lock arrives, that real lock is not the lock that they actually thought it was, and the key doesn't work.
Mm.
Or sometimes it magically does, and they think, oh, brilliant. And then they try it again, it doesn't. And they're like, why? That's really frustrating and annoying.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got like the master key, and the master key is one that you can just manipulate because you're an amazing locksmith, you can just manipulate the key and then it fits any lock. Well, all of a sudden you're unbeatable, aren't you? And I'm interested in exploring how we can create locksmiths as opposed to key turners.
Yeah. And
Cheers.
I think a lockpick is a good way of looking at it, because like when you see it in the movie, they might have two or three little tools and they interchange them slightly.
There you go. Yeah,
Then
yeah,
they fiddle around with it a little bit and then
yeah,
it'll open. And
yeah.
you might have to attempt to do this with the same tool 10, 20 times before you get it and go, that makes sense. And then the next time you go to use it, that makes sense and it's effective. So the child doesn't have to master passing the ball. The child just has to be able to strike the ball with their laces for that part, or strike the ball with the inside of the foot. Just can they get a ball from here to there in a way that their teammate's going to be able to use it?
Or just to extend that a little, they need to be able to propel the ball,
Yeah,
in theory, towards a teammate based on a series of variables.
yeah,
And actually, going back to this point about the dimming metaphor used earlier on. So, again, the reason we want as much of the environment to be illuminated as we can is because and this goes back to something Andrew Wilson once said to me, which stuck with me, had resonance and meaning, which was that variability is not noise, and that's one of the assumptions of the
yeah,
cognitive approach, that we reduce variability to gain focus.
yeah, yeah,
Variability is not noise; it's signal. So ball propulsion, propelling the ball in a variety of different ways, using various different tools like outside foot in laces, inside foot, whatever
yeah,
it might be, back heel, whatever it might be, is determined by what my opponents are doing and where my teammates are. Because if I've got to go over, I've got to do it a certain way. If I've got to go round, I've got to do it a certain way. If I need to hit it fast and hard, I've got to do it a certain way. And it's about understanding that
mm,
makes for skillful skill, as
yes,
opposed to what people are often thinking about, and they confuse technique and skill. The assumption is I learn a technique, a movement pattern, and then I'm going to apply it in the context.
yeah,
And the ecological practitioner works the other way around. The context derives the movement pattern, and
yeah,
it's never the same twice. So we're learning, like you say, lock picking,
yeah,
using a variety of, yes, there are always going to be the certain tools you'll need to use to unlock the lock, 100%. But they're used, like you say, in an infinite array of different combinations to actually do the job you need
yeah.
to do.
And I think it's also important for what I do is that, so two things. One, a lot of the children I work with would never back heel the ball. They wouldn't even consider it. So
Mm.
we back heel the ball as part of it so that they can go, oh, this could be used.
Yeah.
So that's also when I might say, when you're at home, play a fun game, but do this, do that, because what I see a lot of is in the isolated work, someone will get very good at a certain kind of technique or skill. But when the game presents something, they've only got one or two tools to use or picks instead of having five or six.
Yeah.
So for me, we've also got to introduce the children to the different ways of doing it. So, like you said, with your foot, you've got the bottom of your foot, you've got your laces, you've got inside, you've got outside, you've got toes, and you've got the back of your foot. All of it can be used, and all of it can be used almost all of the time. However, depending what the situation is, a different part's probably going to be more effective than another part. But if you've experienced all of the different parts, when it comes to that environment, you're better able to use one. I'm finding if someone has, and the way I see that is that within this massive neural network you're building for having your feet around the ball, if you're putting in there connections for the different parts of your feet, and every time you use them in an environment and see what happens with this feedback loop, you strengthen, adapt, twist, change this network you're building over the years, you get to a place where we're talking about bringing in more information, right? So if you can make your movements with your feet and the ball to propel the ball as automatic as possible, so not having to think through every step, you then allow yourself that's going to be taken care of subconsciously, and you then allow yourself to be able to take in more of what's going on around you to be able to do it. Also, what I find is that by allowing them to figure it out, is their intention might be to kick a ball in a certain way or propel it in a certain way, but their ability to do it isn't quite there, if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
for example,
Well, relative to the opponents, yeah.
yeah. So, like, there's a
I'm going to have
boy
to,
who we're gonna,
Scott. We
yeah,
literally the blink of an eye, 90 minutes goes.
I know.
And my next meeting has started. Unfortunately, I said I did a hard stop. I think we're going to have to do a part two because we haven't even
I love
scratched
to.
the surface of what we were going to talk about, and there's so much more to unpack. So I'm really
Yeah,
sorry I have to cut us off because I do have to take
no,
this other
that's
call.
fine.
Um, but I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for putting up with my crazy metaphors. um, but I think there's more for us to explore together. So maybe we go away, have a little bit of a think, reconnect, and then we'll do a part. We'll definitely do a part two. How do you feel about
Yeah,
that?
no, I'd love to do that. There's a lot of good stuff come out of it, and it also helps me make a bit more sense of stuff as I talk through it. And like you said, the metaphor of the lock pick, yeah, that's the one for me right now. I'm going to go think about that one. Yeah,
Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll speak to you again in a couple of weeks.
sounds like a plan. I appreciate it. Thank you.